Welcome to Secret Story. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel. I was finally able to plop down on a sofa outside the banquet hall. They were all dancing inside and having a good time. The bride and groom were gone. The cleaning crew were waiting. People were starting to trickle out and go home or back to the hotel. I had organized things before: a company picnic, a family vacation, projects at work. Nothing compared to the three-ring circus that was my daughter's wedding. One of the ladies in the cleaning crew peered into the hall, rolled her eyes and shook her head at the others. "We're almost done," I told her. "Wait." The lady glared at me for a moment. "Where's Julio?" I asked, naming their manager. The lady retreated, giving me a quiet apology. Months of preparation, intense days, dealing with guests, fighting with caterers, wrangling bridesmaids, managing rehearsals like a drill instructor, stressing over budgets, combating with a bridezilla, and I wasn't about to take attitude from a cleaning woman, but we were going into overtime. I decided to get up from the comfortable sofa and get back to the party. It was a happy day for almost everyone except me. I just wanted to go home. Layla, my sister, was heading outside for a cigarette break. "Did Jack leave already?" She was referring to my ex-husband Jack, who re-entered our lives after 3 years just to walk his daughter down the aisle. "He stayed for the party. Now he was headed back Texas where he was living now." "Yup. And good riddance to him," I said. "I think my kid's waiting for you," she said with a squinty, curious look and a smile as she went outside. Hanging by the door inside the hall was Toby, my nephew. He had taken off the tie of his black groomsman suit. "Aunt Mel," he said, with a goofy grin, happy to see me. I sighed. Everyone was dancing except him. His bridesmaid partner was dancing with several people. Toby had probably spent most of the wedding reception by the wall or at his table on his phone, but he came to give me a hug even though we had talked an hour ago. Being a foot taller than me, he had to bend down to do it. Then he kissed the other cheek, like he always did. He was always so comfortable around me. He was probably the only family member I hadn't yelled at during the wedding preparations. That I held his cute face in my hands and looked at him seriously. "Why aren't you dancing?" He shrugged. "I don't want to." His body was moving with me to the rhythm of the loud music. "Really?" I said. He laughed that sheepish laugh he does and started dancing with me. "Don't be a wallflower," I said to him. "Where's Kathy?" "She likes you." "No, she doesn't." "How do you know?" "She said she doesn't like me and that she wants to dance with other people." I put my hands on my hips and looked around for Kathy among the flock of women in pink dresses dancing in a line. I had specifically chosen her as Toby's partner because I thought they'd have some chemistry, being the same age, both being seniors in high school and into the same silly comic book movies. "I don't care," Toby said. "Did she really say that?" "Ooh, I had more yelling to do tonight." Then I spotted Babs, the bubbly, chubby college girl who loved to dance with anyone, who was flirty and sweet, a little promiscuous I heard, but that's okay. A popular girl, she usually had a whole bunch of friends around her, but for a moment she was alone, looking at her phone. "Go dance with Babs," I said to him urgently. "I don't want to dance." "Go. Now. I have to get back to work. The party's over." "Not for me. It's not over till we land back in Chicago. Now go. Hurry, before someone else sweeps her up." He hesitated, shuffling his feet, looking a little distressed. That I pulled out my phone to send a text message, but I kept urging Toby. "Don't visit me later unless you've danced with her," I said. And he sauntered over to Babs, who looked up at me having received my message. She smiled at Toby, gave him a warm hello, took his hand and secretly nodded to me. She pulled him onto the dance floor in time to finish up the cha-cha dance. Julio, in charge of the cleaning crew, opened the door. "Give us a half hour," I said without even looking up. "Ma'am," he began to say. That I turned to him. "Just a half hour. We paid a lot for this room." "Don't worry. We'll be out in a half hour. I promise. Okay. Go chill for a bit. He exhaled angrily but walked away. When he was gone, I looked over at the DJ who was looking at me and I twirled my index finger. He announced a last call for drinks. I looked back at the dance floor and smiled. Babs was spinning Toby around them. Why daughter wanted to get married in California, where her finance was living. So, our families booked a hotel near the banquet hall in Anaheim for a week. And every night, Toby would come visit my hotel room to drink tea with me. He wasn't into tea. He just wanted to see me. I found it amusing. We'd have little conversations on the sofa. Watching TV, sometimes holding hands, and then he'd give me an extremely long hug goodnight that sometimes ended with him smothering my face with kisses. It was cute. Harmless, I figured. An hour later, as the last few of us finally left the banquet hall, I looked around for Toby and Babs. Babs came to me and told me Toby had left already with his mom and little brother. Babs was going to the after party at some club in Hollywood. You coming? She asked. I want to catch a celeb. I don't party like that. I'm going home to a shower and a nice cup of tea. A cup o' tea? She said with an accent. You're so old, Melinda. Come out and have some fun. She looked around to see if anyone could hear. Come out and get drunk and get before you go back to work. Ha, I shook my head. Sounds tempting. That's more your thing. Divorced and not enjoying it. What is wrong with you? Babs gave me a hug before heading off. Say goodnight to Toby for me. He ran off without saying shit to me. He's so rude. He's shy. Whatever. Shyness is still rudeness. I was hoping Toby would not come visit me. It was our last night in California and I had worked like a dog today and I just wanted to sleep. After a shower, I put on my long nightgown and I started preparing my herbal tea. I decided to put the do not disturb sign on my door to keep Toby from coming. I went to the door and opened it. Just as Toby was just about to knock on it, I sighed. He was biting his lip and looking down at his feet. I danced with her, he said finally, pointing at me without looking. I leaned my head on the door and nodded. You did. I actually walked up to her. And she was receptive, wasn't she? See? All you had to do was ask someone at the right time, right? And she liked you. Even though you didn't say bye to her. I guess. He saw the door sign I was holding, and his shoulders fell. You're going to sleep right away? Yeah, I said. He put his hands in his pocket and looked down the hall. I'm sorry, Toby. He nodded. He sniffed. Tea. He finally made eye contact with me. Of course, I smiled at him and took his hand. Just for me, though. I'll see you tomorrow morning when we head out, okay? Okay, he said. But he was staring at the floral print of my nightgown. I swung his hand a little to shake him out of the little trance he was in. He moved closer to give me his signature hug. Toby. That goofy mischievous smile on his face was infectious. I shook my head at him, but he did it again. Got you again, he said. He tried to do it a third time, but I turned my head in time. And he went for it. Toby, I tried to say. Toby, what are you doing? I looked down the hall. Someone will see. I held his face and looked into his eyes, his hands, though. I closed my eyes, and he was so strong. He started lifting me a little. Oh! I cried out in surprise, before covering my mouth quickly and glancing down the hallway. He laughed quietly. I tapped him furiously to put me down. He shook his head. There was that goofy grin again. But I gave him an angry look. Put me down, I insisted through gritted teeth. He landed me gently back on the carpet. I was ready to push him away, but he stood up tall, towering over me. The tea, I remembered. And I pulled away from him to go back into the hotel room. I hurried back to the small kitchen of the room. Most of the water in the pot had boiled away, but there was still some left. I turned off the stove. Then I held on to the counter, trying to process what was happening. I heard Toby close the door behind him as he walked into the room. I was breathing hard. I was thinking about Layla in the room down the hall. What would she think? I figured I should put a stop to this. I nodded to myself. Before I could turn around, Toby was behind me, not just behind me. He wouldn't dare, I thought. He dared. This is so wrong, I thought. Toby was already too attached to me emotionally. Someone must be the adult here, I reasoned. I turned to face him. The look on my face made him stop. Our eyes were locked. I moved towards him and he moved backwards back into the main room. Toby stood there in awe. I moved towards him again. I made him sit on the bed. He looked up at me. Questioningly. I smiled at him and nodded. He was about to discover long-lost treasure. And it had been so long since I had been someone's treasure. Toby. I said that. He had that sheepish look on his face again. And just as I was about, there was a loud knock on the door. I up and opened the door. Layla looked worried. Have you seen Toby? I can't find him anywhere. He's not answering my messages. I know he usually comes to see you, but he should have been back by now. She stopped when she saw Toby walking towards her. Tada, I said. There he is. We were just about to have tea. Want some? No, I'm good, Layla said, with a furrowed brow and a curious look on her face. Everything okay in here? I shrugged. Yeah. Why? Layla shook her head. You're coming, Toby. Yeah, he said, marching over to her a little awkwardly. Layla moved aside and watched Toby go down the hallway back to their room. I focused on filling the pot with water, but I could feel her eyes on me. Once the water was in and getting hot, I had nothing else to focus on. So, I looked at my sister. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with her lips tight before turning around and walking out. I exhaled loudly and buried my face in my hand. Then I noticed them on the floor. I closed my eyes and said to myself, oh. My clothes. I pounded the top of my fist on my forehead. Our flight home tomorrow was going to be interesting. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise stated. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel. Welcome to Secret Story, an invitation to be a naughty wife. Sandra did not want to go. She had been to these functions a few times with her husband. It was almost obligatory. Many wives will know the feeling, she thought. Such functions are always very boring, and mainly because Kevin, Sandra's husband, once he gets into conversation with other work colleagues, just forgets he is supposed to be with her, and she ends up like a spare part wishing the whole evening was over and they could just go home. It irritated her all the more when she heard her husband laughing raucously at something one of his friends had said. The laughter gets louder with each drink he consumes. Oh, she didn't mind her husband having a great time if she was having a good time with him. However, not when she is bored out of her tree, smiling at people she doesn't even know and being the dutiful little wife. Sometimes it reaches the point where she could just walk up to him and throw a drink straight into his face and say, "Know me? I am the woman you came in with." Kevin always wanted to impress his boss and often went too far in trying to ingratiate himself for Sandra's liking, and she thought it did him more harm than good. It certainly made her want to throw up. His boss and owner of a large firm of city accountants is Richard Meade, a man in his mid to late 60s who had developed quite a paunch. He had silvery hair and was short of stature. It was difficult to imagine him ever having been attractive to any woman. There were some 20 guests, 10 couples all sat down to dinner at the large dining table. Each course was served by 2 young girls about 18 years of age. Richard Meade was filling his face with one mouthful after another and eating with his mouth open, which was a grotesque sight. Of course he had the outward signs of wealth, displaying gold rings on his fingers and what must have been a very expensive watch. He sat at the head of the table in an imposing posture, as if to say, I am the alpha male here. At the opposite end of the table sat his wife Rachel, a leggy brunette who Sandra had met on numerous occasions and had developed a good relationship with over the past 2 years or so. Sandra would have estimated her to be around 42 years of age, easily 20 years, or more, younger than her husband. There is no denying her beauty, Sandra thought, her silky auburn hair flowing down towards the small of her back, her eyes a stunning brown shaded by long eyelashes. She wore a long red dress with low-cut back that accentuated her figure as it molded and into her slim waist. It would be easy to ask what she was doing married to Richard Meade were it not for his obvious wealth. Sandra had met 3 of the men before who were friends of Kevin's. She would say friends loosely because basically they were all backstabbers when it came down to it. Malcolm Crompton was a rising star in the company and was the managing director of the operation in the north of England. Apparently he was very clever but had a reputation among female staff of being a bit of a creep, altogether too touchy-feely for the liking of many. His wife was a small and petite brunette. She wore a short pink dress with a rather low plunging neckline. In fact, looking around the table there wasn't much to pick from apart the guy who sat at the opposite side of the table to Sandra and a few seats to her left in the direction of the top of the table. She did not know his name then, but he was quite attractive, the classic chiseled good looks, tall, dark and very handsome. Most women, if not all the women in the room, would find him by far and away the only one worth looking at more than once. The woman sat next to him was an attractive-looking blonde who dressed quite classy but did not have a wedding ring on her finger, so one had to assume she was not the wife of Mr. Gorgeous Terry Fernley. She had met before, he was with his wife Paige. How do these average-looking men find these attractive wives? Paige is brunette, very nice legs she made sure everyone could see. Her yellow dress was not too short but enough to ride a good third of the way up her thighs. Terry Fernley was clearly very proud of his attractive wife and seemed to enjoy her display of thigh, regularly placing his hand on the one nearest to him as if to say to other men in the room, "Look what I got." After dinner everyone retired to a large drawing room, and that was where the mingling took place, and Sandra found herself abandoned by her inattentive spouse. There will hardly be a married woman anywhere who has not been abandoned with a drink in her hand and yet expected to smile sweetly at everyone and pretend to be enjoying a boring evening. She was left in that state for a good half an hour. Suddenly, she was saved by Rachel Meade, who came and joined her. Sandra was certain that Rachel found these parties just as boring as she did. "You look a bit lost, darling," she said. "Husbands can be such arseholes, don't you think?" Sandra just smiled as sweetly as she could and was careful to remain noncommittal. "Richard is no different, I have to suffer these occasions too." "I have always imagined you have quite an exciting life, Rachel," Sandra said. "Oh yes, I certainly do, dear. I have a very exciting life," she smiled knowingly and raised one finger to her lips to indicate that she had just imparted a naughty secret. Sandra raised her eyebrows and smiled at this subtle hint. "Most of the women here are members of my secret little exclusive club. We kill the boring lives we would otherwise have artificially massaging the overblown egos of this lot," she added, nodding in the direction of a huddle of the male guests who were obviously laughing at some dirty joke or other. Surprised that she would half reveal what seemed like a dark secret, Sandra's mouth fell open, but she could not help a little giggle at the audacity of the woman. Was she telling her that she was getting it somewhere else and that she wasn't the only wife in the room doing so? Emboldened by Sandra's little giggle, Rachel continued, "Come on, dear, you don't think for 1 minute that I limit my life to podgy belly over there, do you?" Half nodding her head in the direction of her husband. "He keeps me in luxury and pays the bills, but when it comes to the sack I need something hunky." "Where do you get your bit on the side, Sandra?" She said it so matter-of-fact as if there could be no doubt that Sandra would be having an affair, as if it was natural and taken for granted that she would be doing so and that it was normal for Rachel, and probably the circles in which she moved. Was it just expected of Sandra too? Is that why she felt bold enough to impart her secret? I have no bit on the S, she started to answer, but Rachel cut her short and again took control of the conversation. Well, Sandra darling, you must get your jollies somewhere. Husbands can be so boring between the sheets, don't you think? She asked in her very upper middle-class accent. Rachel saw the look on Sandra's face and was quick to capitalize. Oh Sandra, you poor thing, you have one of those 5-minute husbands, in, out, balls empty in good night. This time Sandra really did laugh. Sounds about right, she said. Is he your one and only, dear? Has there ever been anyone else? Now this was getting a bit personal even between friends, but woman to woman Sandra felt she had little option but to answer. Definitely my one and only, she said, feeling quite uncomfortable that she was revealing the quality of her life to Rachel and that she had allowed Rachel to tease it out of her. Surely you must get curious sometimes, I know I did. You must sometimes wonder, darling. This time Sandra did not answer and just smiled as pleasantly as she could. It was like that with my first husband, she said, then I got to thinking about it. There was this absolutely gorgeous hunk of a maintenance man at work who occasionally came into my office to change bulbs and do other little odd jobs like cleaning the windows. I suppose I must have flirted with him a bit too obviously until one day he screwed me over my own desk. Sandra felt her face flush and her chest tighten as she tried to control her breathing. Rachel had made it sound so exotic that Sandra was feeling hot anyway. Be that as it may, we will leave that subject, Rachel said, which disappointed Sandra somewhat. She was intrigued as to her present extramarital relationship and would have liked to hear more. Rachel had lit the blue touch paper of Sandra's natural female curiosity. I am going to catch the train into London tomorrow. I want to do a little shopping in Oxford Street. Would you like to come along, dear? Sandra did like Rachel a lot but wished she would stop calling her dear and darling. I don't know, I hardly ever go to London, not my scene really. Oh, you must come, we could have a girly day out, call somewhere for lunch or find a nice little cafe or something. Meet me at the station around 9 o'clock. I really don't think. Oh, go on, why not? Sandra said, actually feeling quite excited at getting out and about for a few hours. Rachel paid for the train tickets and they traveled first class. I just love shopping, Sandra, don't you? I find it very therapeutic and good for the soul. Sandra decided to make it clear from the start that she could not afford to go expensive shopping like Rachel could and that her budget was not that of a woman with an open-ended credit card. I do like shopping, Rachel, but I am afraid my budget does not run to the kind of clothes you buy. Oh, don't you worry about that, darling, I am going on a window shopping expedition, not in need of new clothes just now, relaxed Sandra. Well, that made Sandra feel better anyway. No, we will just go window shopping, take in some of the sights, call somewhere for a meal and catch the train back. Let's call it a bonding session, shall we? Why was Sandra getting all this attention? She was trying to work it out. Rachel was a friend who had phoned her a few times but hardly what one would call a close friend. Of all the guests at the party, why had she so quickly homed in on Sandra? I could see, Sandra, that you did not like all the formal stuffiness at the party last night. I am always pleased when they are over. Have you met most of them before? She asked, as soon they got sat down in the first-class compartment and as if she knew what Sandra was thinking. No, Sandra said, I have had casual acquaintance with one or two of the others, but that's all. I have met Malcolm Crompton before but never his wife. Oh, Hannah, yes, you would like Hannah. I will make sure you get to meet her in a more relaxed atmosphere. She loves a good time. She is actually such good fun, loves life. She said it with that same look on her face she had when she told Sandra she had a fun life herself. You must know Paige Fernley, she continued. Paige is very fun-loving too. Yes, I have met Paige before but only briefly. I have met her husband once or twice through Kevin. Terry seems to be good friends with my husband. Oh, good, Rachel said, I am pleased you have met Paige before. Why was she pleased Sandra had met Paige already? It did not feel right, like there was a hidden agenda slowly emerging. Sandra thought. Who was the guy with the classy dressed blonde? Sandra asked. Ah, darling, I just knew you would mention Robert Burley, what a hunk he is. None of us would kick him out of bed. Sandra felt her face flush. It was like she had inadvertently betrayed herself in some way. Rachel couldn't help but notice. Oh come on Sandra, so who was the woman with him? Lord knows he always turns up with a different woman every time. I can introduce you to him if you wish. Rachel was right about one thing, he was one gorgeous-looking man, but there are lots of good-looking men. Sandra thought. No, it is all right Rachel, Sandra said a little unconvincingly. Sandra darling, marriage does not turn you into a nun the minute the vicar says, I pronounce you man and wife. There is such a thing as life after marriage, you know. In our little club we all love our husbands dearly. Their job is to bring home the goodies, protect the home, keep us in the style to which we are all accustomed, she said laughing. So let me get this clear, Paige and Hannah and you are all screwing other men, is that what you are telling me? Sandra ventured the question, thinking to get it out into the open just what Rachel's little club was all about. Not just me, Paige and Hannah, it depends on who can come along and whose husbands are away. We only arrange a meeting of the club if we can get at least 3 of the wives to come and know we will all get away with it. Right. Sandra said, and who are the lucky guys then? Well, there is a rich selection, only 2 willing, but they have to be very attractive and fit. If you saw them Sandra you might think it was the women who were the lucky ones. And are there single women in this club? Good Lord no, Rachel said, looking startled. We could never trust single girls to keep their mouths shut darling. The day they spent in London was nothing special for Sandra, they would really look great on you but not my style, Sandra said diplomatically. Oh you underestimate yourself dear, you have an amazing figure. You really must loosen up and get some fun into your life. She said I bet he would, Sandra gasped. But he isn't going to get the chance is he? Well, look Sandra, that is up to you dear. Her tone suddenly became a little more matter-of-fact. I am going to buy this matching set for you. This will make you look great. But really Rachel, Kevin will think I have lost my marbles if I wear those. They are not for Kevin, he will never see them, she said. Sandra was stunned. The last thing she wanted was another woman choosing and buying her. Look Rachel, did I shush, Rachel said, stopping Sandra short and again holding one finger across her lips to indicate silence. When the cats are away, well you know what the mice get up to. Well she definitely had Sandra there. Thinking it is one thing but carrying it out surely is another, isn't it? Sandra put the question to her with solid eye contact. Well that's okay Sandra, but we cannot deny nature, and it is well established that the ovulating wife starts looking for good genes. It is nature darling for a woman to look around at the options. Of course our husbands are lovely, we adore them, but there are those times when our minds turn to a good-looking, hunky man who keeps himself in trim and who can last more than 5 minutes. Richard and I have 2 lovely sons, but it takes no more than a glance to see which one is Richard's and which one is not. The 2 women both chuckled loudly at this revelation. Such men tend to be selfish bastards though, Sandra said. How yes darling, they both laughed again. All the way back on the train Rachel opened up even more about her extramarital life, and it was rich and varied. Luther would just love you Sandra, once you have black you never go back, as they say. You just ask Paige. Sandra looked at Rachel aghast, her mouth fell open. Paige? Do you mean before she married Terry? Sandra, you are so naive and innocent. The more Kevin climbs the company ladder the less you will see of him, the lonelier you will get, the more neglected you will become. He will spend more and more time away from home stuffing call girls. The phone calls you get will become less and less frequent. You will have many lonely nights in bed alone. Think about it Sandra. I can tell you that Kevin is going to be promoted and will spend much of his time in Scotland and Northern Ireland where he will be in charge of operations. Hardly stopping for thought, Rachel continued. You might not think about it now, but Luther is tall just like Robert. He has an amazing ebony body. Oh yes, and how would I explain the black baby? Sandra said laughingly. This isn't the 1950s, darling. We have the pill and the morning after pill. Think about it, we women have never had such freedom. I would not have John, my second son, if I had taken the pill as I should have, and if his real father had not gone all the way when he should have pulled out. She sounded so funny and they both laughed somewhat dirtily in a very girly way. Robert is Richard's nephew and lives life like a playboy. Sandra just did not know how to respond. She hadn't the slightest intention of joining Rachel's little club. She prided herself on not being racist, but interracial was something else. Obviously Robert would always stand a chance with any woman, but she was happily married to Kevin even if he does make her puke the way he creeps around Richard Meade and ignores her at those company functions. In bed that night with Kevin at the side of her fast asleep, she was staring through the darkness at the ceiling, her mind running over everything Rachel had said. She could not believe that 3, and by the sounds of it more than 3. Rachel made it all sound so natural. Was she really just naive and innocent? Sandra asked herself. She did not tell Kevin what she had learned because she knew the trouble it could cause if it all got out, and Rachel had after all confided in her as a friend. She was acutely aware that she had mentioned the names of 4 men, Robert, Luther, Paul and Daniel, but only mentioned 3 women, herself, Hannah and Paige. It was obvious that Rachel was given the task of recruiting. She turned over and wrapped her arm around Kevin. He was fast asleep. She softly whispered in his ear, "Oh Kevin, please don't ever leave me or let me forget how much I love you. Women can get so bored, vulnerable." She drifted off to sleep. Just as Rachel had said, Kevin took over in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Sandra suggested that they should move to live in Scotland, but Kevin did not want to move house. "We will be okay here," he said. "I will spend more time at home than you think." At first that turned out to be the case, and Kevin was only away 3 days a week at most. Sandra could easily cope with that, and they had nearly every weekend together and made the most of it. They spoke often on the phone while he was away, either by using his hotel room phone or more often his mobile, but as the workload increased and the job became more demanding, he spent less and less time at home. There was always a good reason. They talked every night on the phone when he was away, but it was not like having him at home, and he was away between 4 and 5 nights a week and sometimes even at weekend. Rachel phoned often to see how Sandra was coping, and they would meet in town for a coffee and a bit of shopping more often. "How are things, Sandra?" she would ask. "Okay, Rachel, we get by. We see each other most weekends and phone each other every night." "Hasn't he even missed phoning you at least one night?" she asked. "No, he is very good and phones me all the time and sends me regular text messages." It was a lie. In the past week he had missed phoning twice, and when Sandra phoned him on his mobile it was switched off. He told her he had been out for a drink with some mates in Edinburgh and had forgot to switch his mobile on, and when he got back to his hotel it was 1 o'clock in the morning and he thought it was too late to ring her. She let it go, but it had been niggling her somewhat, but she was not going to give Rachel the pleasure of knowing about that, or she might start telling her all about Luther's again. Rachel started phoning her more often. Every few days she was on the phone asking if Sandra was okay. She never phoned when Kevin was at home, which told Sandra she knew when he was away. Rachel often visited her husband's office and would know where everyone was and whether they were at home or away. The next time Kevin phoned, Sandra told him she was not happy with him being away all the time. "I am not away the entire time, sweetheart, and you know it. I cannot just give up my job like that. But it is getting worse," she said, crying down the phone. "You were away all last week and 4 days this week. I am sorry, love. I will see what I can do to get home more often." For the next 2 weeks things got better, but then fell back again, and the phone calls got less frequent and his mobile was switched off much more when he went out with his friends. Crying herself to sleep had become a regular occurrence. Are you sure he hasn't got another woman somewhere? Rachel asked, probing away at Sandra's growing vulnerability. I don't think he would, Rachel, I really don't. When did you last have Sandra, tell me. Should I tell her the truth? Sandra thought. It is 3 weeks now, she said, knowing it was longer. Well, I think it is longer than that, Sandra. It is written all over your face, darling, and I do not believe a man working away from home all that time is not hunting around for it and probably getting it. She did not relate to Rachel the constant thoughts she had about Robert. Only that morning she had been laid in bed thinking about him. As she looked up at the ceiling, she went again to meet Rachel in the little cafe they often used in the town center. As Sandra walked in, she saw Rachel already sat at one of the tables. Robert was with her, as was a black guy who she immediately assumed was Luther. Robert immediately recognized her and jumped up to get Sandra a coffee while she made her way to the table and the one spare chair. This is Sandra, Rachel said. Sandra, this is Luther. Hello, Sandra said with minimum eye contact. Hello. Luther said, I have heard so much about you. I bet you have, Sandra thought, smiling as she sat down. Luther was much as Rachel had described him, tall, muscular, clearly fit and wickedly good-looking. In the second it took to shake hands, Sandra had taken it all in, and when he sat down in the chair next to her she could hardly stop herself from looking at his strong and lengthy thighs in those tight light gray trousers, and he certainly wasn't afraid to let any girl who cared to look see the shape of his equipment. Sandra had got an eyeful of it as he sat down, but disciplined herself not to risk another look. Robert returned with her coffee and refills for everyone. Quite a welcoming party. Sandra said, blushing again. Nice to see you again, Robert said. Yes, I saw you this morning in my bed, Sandra thought. Once again Robert looked simply amazing. Sandra, we are having a little party at Luther's place tomorrow evening. Hannah and Paige will be coming along. We wondered if you would like to come, just for a few drinks. Can I think about it, Rachel? It is a bit out of the blue. Just for a few drinks, Sandra thought. She may be naive, but not that naive. She was thinking, if she went to this party with these two gorgeous men around, yes, take your time, no pressure, Robert said, but I would love it if you could come along. His brown eyes made contact with Sandra's. He had been briefed by Rachel, she was sure. He probably knew he was talking to a woman who had not had for nearly 6 weeks. Sandra looked at Rachel, pulling her eyes from Robert's. I will ring you tomorrow and let you know. Once I know you are definitely coming, I will send Robert to pick you up, Rachel said. Sandra's heart was thumping. What was she thinking of not refusing outright? She had to take a grip of herself, or heaven knows where she was heading. When she got home she couldn't think of anything else other than the conversation in the cafe. She desperately needed to talk to Kevin just to get back on track. Just to hear her husband's voice. Just to hear him say how much he loved her. She waited and fell asleep in the early hours of the morning without a phone call. She spent much of the next morning really angry with Kevin. She had always been told not to phone him during the day when he was working. To tell the truth, she could not care less. She just knew she was getting more and more likely to say yes to the party, but could not bring herself to actually phone Rachel. At about 6 o'clock Rachel phoned. Have you decided, Sandra? We are all waiting for you. Sandra took a deep breath. I will be ready in 30 minutes. Okay, Rachel said, and then lowered her voice to a whisper. Don't forget to wear those. God, Sandra had not given them a second's thought since she buried them away her drawer. She could not possibly wear them. Why would she, unless she was really doing it for a man, and another man at that? She started to get ready and looking at herself. The idea of just trying them on felt very naughty. She actually felt a bit giddy. She slipped a black fishnet hold-up nylon stocking over her foot and worked it up her leg and thigh, smoothing it all the way, then a second one on her other leg. Sandra was feeling and looking even more, but who was all this for? Of course, she told herself it was for her and her alone. No man is going to get to see this, she thought as she stood again in front of the mirror looking at herself. She knew she was every bit as attractive as any of the other women, if not more so. Her figure was perfect, her long red hair reached almost into the small of her back. She swished it a few times. The troublesome question was, why was she thinking of Robert, and yes, even Luther, as she admired her reflection yet again? Why wasn't she thinking of Kevin? Selecting a nice tight-fitting blue dress, she slipped into it, sliding her hands down over her slender body and smoothing it around her figure. She picked a short white coat and busied herself with last-minute touches to her makeup and her hair as she waited for Robert to come and pick her up. Robert arrived looking even more amazing than he had at the party or in the cafe. He opened the passenger side door but very gentlemanly averted his eyes as Sandra got into the car, respecting her modesty. Soon he was sat in the driver's seat, looking gorgeous in a dark suit, open-neck gleaming white shirt, no tie. He had obviously taken great care in his appearance. Manicured fingernails, highly polished black leather shoes, perfect scent of aftershave. They just chatted the usual rather nervous small talk. Sandra sat rather prim and proper, making sure her dress reached her knees, well, almost. She kept her knees firmly clamped together with her hands clasped and resting in her lap. 20 minutes drive and they arrived at Luther's and pulled in through the wrought iron gates, which opened automatically on their arrival. This place was the mansion of one very rich man, she thought as they pulled up to the front door. This time a door attendant stepped forward and opened the door for her. He was nowhere near as gentlemanly as Robert had been. Sandra swung both legs out together, knees tight shut. If someone was going to get an eyeful tonight, it was not going to be him. Robert got out of the car and handed his car keys to the flunky, obviously so he could take Robert's car and park it. Together they walked in through the large open door, where they were met by Luther, who was also dressed immaculately in a black suit, white shirt and blue tie. As they walked through the hallway, Sandra was acutely aware that she was stepping up a few social classes. Luther must be one seriously rich guy. Soon they were in a spacious drawing room where there were 3 large sofas and 3 large easy armchairs. Rachel came to greet her. "So pleased you decided to come along, Sandra. Let me introduce you to a few people. You already know Robert and Luther. This is Hannah, you would have seen her at Fullerton, and this is Paige, who you have already met before." Sandra acknowledged them both with kisses on the cheek. Fullerton, she assumed, was the name of the Meads mansion. "Now you really must meet Dan and Paul." Both men had a small glass of red wine in their hands as they stepped forward and shook hands. Paul was dressed in a blue suit and looked very smart. He wore a blue shirt with a white open collar. Dan was the only one dressed totally casual with just a white open shirt and black trousers. His torso tapered perfectly from his broad shoulders to the belt of his trousers. Both men were really attractive. Paul, with blonde, rather unruly hair, and Dan's hair was browner in color. Both men had really nice tans and had obviously built them up over time. Rachel certainly knew how to assemble good-looking studs for a party. The piped music was soft and mainly old standards made to set the mood and the tone for the evening. All doors to the room were closed and the piped music must have been organized from elsewhere. Wine was freely flowing and the men